Chess game has three possible outcome: a win, a loss, or a draw. There are several ways to end up a game into a draw. Maybe you left with only king on the board and you survive for the 50 moves without being checkmated. Stalemate, threefold repetition, laziness, overconfidence. Yes, you heard that right. Laziness and overconfidence. I have experienced this not only in my own game but in some of my students' game as well. I have witnessed this among higher level chess player. Watch this video which is about chess position analysis and game psychology. Let me show you the exact same position and try to explain what I mean by laziness and overconfidence. If you're interested in exploring our older video which is related to pawn endgame analysis or other videos which is about chess position analysis, the link is in the description box. So without further ado, let's jump on the board. Look into this position. It's black to play and you can clearly see black is just one step away from the pawn promotion and white is also just one step away from the pawn promotion. So in hurry, in overconfidence, black decide to promote with the queen. Well, it's a blunder. White can now clearly win this game just by taking the rook on the b3. Now white rook is supporting on his b7 pawn. In this position, after some calculation, maybe Black realized that he did the blunder and now only one way to survive from this position is by giving the continuous check to the white king, because white pawn is just one step away from the pawn promotion, which means if black want to survive, he need to give continuous check and try to grab the rook and later the pawn as well. So first, the only check available from this position is starting with queen to f4 check. From this position, white clear cut have 5 different ways to save himself from this check, like king to h1, h3, or the g1. Or maybe he can decide to put a piece in between checker and the king, like pawn to g3 or rook to g3. Let's break down rook to g3 and pawn to g3 first. If we push the pawn to g3, which is attack on the queen, but it is a blunder, and if you follow the Leach's engine, it is showing that black can do the checkmate in 16 move. Of course, we are not trying to decode it that deeply, but as we discussed earlier, because white is just one step away from the pawn promotion, which means the only way for black to survive is to give the continuous check. And that's what black did with queen to f2 check. Then go to the h3 or the h1. Let's see both one by one. If we decided to go to the h1, we can give the check from the e1. Again, if you think king can go back to the h2, queen can give check from the e2. If now from this position, if king goes to the h3, queen to e6 is a perfect fork and the rook is gone. And now black is also putting attack on the pawn. So h3 doesn't look effective and not h1 and g1 as well, because if you go either h1 or the g1, queen to d1 check and again rook is gone. So that's not a good idea to rotate the king between h1 and h2 once you put your pawn to the g3. Now, after this f2 check, you might think, what if white decided to push his king immediately to the h3? Now black can give the check from the f1. Remember, that's the only way for black to survive, to give the continuous check. The option again for the white king is to go to the h2 or the g4. h2, as we discussed, again black will give the continuous check to survive in this position. But if white decided to go to the g4, there is interesting move that black can do. Remember, black have to give continuous check. He can simply push the pawn to the h5 and give the check. Because you are in the check and you don't have access of h3 or the f4 square, which means king either go to the g5 or grab the pawn on the h5. If king decided to go to the g5, again queen start giving the check from the c1. There is no option except going. Now king have to go to the f5 or the f6. If king goes to the f5, which is a light color square, which means queen to c2 is a perfect fork, rook is gone. And if king decided to grab the pawn, again the same thing, queen to d1 is a fork and the rook is gone. So no f5, no h5. And if king decided to go to the f5, then queen to h6 check. Well, now king have a two different option because black king is blocking the king have an option to go to the f5 or the f7. Well, it doesn't matter because in both the cases, queen to e6 check and rook is gone. So moving king to the g5 doesn't work. Now, what if king takes the pawn? The position is even worse because now there is mate in 2. You can pause and try to find out mate in 2 from here, which start with queen to f5 check. King have only move is to king to h6 and queen to g6 is checkmate. So grabbing the pawn is also not working. We calculated all the possible option after pawn to g3, which is not an effective move. Now, one more idea that appears into mind, how about blocking this check with rook to g3? Well, let me tell you very clearly, this is a blunder. There are two main reasons because rook is also defending the pawn on b7. So moving a rook away from the pawn is not effective anyways. Black can push his king to the c7 and try to put attack on the pawn. When rook is actually pinned, to unpin your rook, you need to at least take one move. Like after black go to the c7, king to h3, you need a one move to make your rook free. Queen takes d4 pawn. Now rook is free. So rook will go to the b3, but still king can go to the b8. And now the game is slightly better for the black. And it is not easy for white to win from this position. Rook to g3 is not working at all. So after queen to f4 check, we have observed pawn to g3 and rook to g3. Let's start thinking about king to g1 and king to h1. Both is actually draw if white decided to push his king to the h1, then queen takes the pawn on h4 check. White have an option to block this check with the rook to h3, try to put attack on the queen, but that's not working because queen have a chance to give the check from the e1. King to h2, there is no effective check from queen to e5, otherwise pawn will take it. So we'll start marching our king closer to the pawn. The purpose of rook is very clear, is to defend that pawn. But once you start moving your rook, because black king is closer to the pawn, black will start put attack on the pawn. So rook to h3 doesn't work. And instead of moving his rook to the h3, if king decided to go to the g1, of course, queen takes the pawn d4 check. King have a chance to go to the either h1 or the h2, but h1 is a blunder because queen to d1, it's a fork and rook will gone. So king have to go to the h2, queen to e5 check. The idea of black into this position is to give you the continuous check so that he stop white pawn from promoting. So he will give the check from e5 to g1, queen to c5 check, and black will give continuous check and there is no progress in the game, which means king to h1 is a draw. If after queen to f4 check, if you go king to g1, which is also leads to a check because queen takes d4 check, king to h2, and now you know all the move that we already explained earlier. So not the g1, not the h1 is working for the white. After queen to f4 check, what all you need to do is analyze the position properly. Don't be lazy. Don't be overconfident. Don't ruin your position because this is a winning position. You have a pawn which is one step away from the pawn promotion. It is not easy for black to attack on the b7 pawn. All you need to do is get rid of the check first. White should start with king to h3. Queen can give the check from f5. After this, king to g3. Queen have a option of e5 check. That's not working because pawn will take. So the only option for black queen to give check is queen to g6 check. And finally, you take back your king to the h2. There is no effective check. All black can do is put its queen on the g8 square, waiting for white to promote. White promote with the check, queen takes queen, rook takes the queen. Now white is rook up in the game and white can easily win this position. So the idea about this puzzle regarding laziness and overconfidence is when you have a chance to promote, don't be overconfident and don't be lazy when opponents start giving you continuous check. Keep that in mind. There is a chance of a draw. Take the idea that your first aim is to get rid of the draw without being fork. and also defending your pawn. That's all for today's video. If you're interested in our older videos, which is related to pawn endgame analysis or the chess position analysis, the link is in the description box. Subscribe to our channel for more informative video related to chess.